So, obviously, we focus on Manchester United. That is the big story at the moment off the field of play. On it as well, but off it as well, regarding Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Now that he is beginning to have utterances or two, if you like, to certain sections of the media. Our time will undoubtedly come, Simon. Sir Jim spoke to certain media outlets yesterday and got onto a variety of different areas of discussion. Is he hitting all the right notes, so with the United fan base already? Let's get to Old Trafford, this famous venue, this home of Manchester United. Does the North deserve a slice of the Wembley iconography, if you like? It's a new stadium, the greatest legacy an owner can imprint on a football club. Ratcliffe says his preference is to build a new stadium for the club that can, quotes, also serve the north of England. United have played there since 1910, but he acknowledged it has become tired and in need of refurbishment. He added the potential project could be a catalyst for regeneration in South Manchester and would therefore warrant a conversation with the government about using taxpayers' money, as you and me. Are we going to pay for it? This was Sir Jim on that.
I mean, it's an impressive stadium, and it's the largest Premier League stadium in the country, second largest stadium in the country to Wembley, I suppose. But it's not quite of the standard you would expect of Manchester United today, and it's fallen behind. Maybe 20 years ago it was, but today it's fallen behind. So we do need to look at the way forward for the stadium, the redevelopment of that stadium. There are clearly, two roads we could take. We could refurbish the existing stadium, or we could look at building a new stadium, and that's what we're looking at the moment.
I don't know who was interviewing him at that stage, but I hope whoever it was leapt on him. I mean, Stefan Borson, the financial analyst who joins you and I now and again, Simon, he says there is clearly no scenario where the country's richest club, which is both publicly listed and majority owned by billionaires, can in essence be subsidised by the taxpayer. It's a ludicrous ask.
Well, of course it is. I mean, I said this 2-3 weeks ago when the subject first was brought to the surface about the idea that there could be some hiding behind the guise of levelling up. And creating a scenario where there can be some mitigation and justification. This is not Wembley. This is a domestic football club. This is a private enterprise owned by billionaires, profited from by billionaires, that spends 1.7 billion on players over a period of time. That is a private business that has its own responsibilities. It's got nothing to do with regenerating Manchester or using taxpayers' money or levelling up as a result of the necessity to do so. And be careful what you want when you start levelling up different parts of the country. Whilst you want investments in these parts of the country, of course you do. Then what happens, as I'm finding as I'm trying to buy a house in Hull, is when you try and buy property up in levelled up parts of the country, all of a sudden property prices go through the ceiling. So the levelling up idea comes with a sting in its tail. I think it's a source. I think Stefan and I will concur on this view that there's not a parallel universe where there can be any mitigation, justification. And by the way, aren't you a little bit embarrassed when your mates across the town have regenerated certain parts of Manchester out of their own dime, in terms of Manchester City's ownership, and basked out in that reflective glory? And all the Man City fans will remind us endlessly how wonderful the Middle Eastern guys have been to redeveloping certain parts of Manchester with no real return for it besides their goodwill.
That area around the Etihad's incredible.
Yeah,
really is.
And fair play to them for doing it. I still maintain there's reasons behind why they do these things, but that doesn't mean that the beneficiaries of it don't have some gratitude attached to it. Jim Ratcliffe is playing all ends and playing all angles and saying the things that you would expect anybody with common sense that's going into a football club that's in a slight scenario of malaise, where it's disconnected from its fan base or sections of its fan base. Its football team aren't producing what it should be producing on the field, and there's a lot of expectation of Jim Ratcliffe. So he's going to say sensible things, and things that will perhaps put people into a conversation where they debate it and ruminate over it. And of course, when he's playing to the Manchester United Supporters Trust Gallery and the North of England suggestion for someone that I believe doesn't live in this country, or when he does resides in London, the viewpoint that the northern side of things needs to be looked after. There is no way. If this was the London Football Club, if this was Chelsea, I'd say sod off. Bowley and his cronies can put their hands in their pocket and build a football stadium. It's preposterous. It's outrageous. It shouldn't be entertained for 1 second. Well, and it's also quite insulting to use it to hide behind levelling up.
I mean, he wants to do it. They want to do it. We don't want to help.
Well,
why should we?
What is the argument? If the argument, I'm all for the idea that international matches and other things can be played in and around the country. An FA Cup final should be played at Villa Park and Hillsborough and all of those stadiums that once upon a time were traditional.
Yeah.
So what are you then? Are you wanting it to be like Wembley? Is your idea that you're going to do this? So are you going to have lots of pop concerts there? Are you going to play rugby matches there? Are you going to play American football there? Is that good then for the image of Man United, that they're a home for everything other than just Manchester United? Is that what you want to be? It's a liberty. I don't blame him for pushing the envelope.
It hasn't done Tottenham any harm.
Well, no, but Tottenham aren't Manchester United. And Tottenham aren't being sold and valued at 5 or 6 billion quid. And Tottenham took funding, but it was COVID funding, and they borrowed money. They didn't take a gift. They took repayable monies.
So what's your message to Sir Jim about using taxpayers' money?
Well, I don't think it's much of a starter, really. I don't think he's playing to a gallery of other people other than Manchester United fans who will think, well, that's a good idea, or why not? And then they'll look at it and they'll not do their research and they'll go, well, Tottenham took government. No, they didn't. Tottenham took COVID funding, which was a loan that has to be repaid at a lower interest rate. Okay, maybe they can get that kind of funding. They still got to repay it. It's still a loan.
Right.
Wembley is not the same. Whether we like it or we don't, and it's not a north-south issue. Part of the imagery of English football and part of the reasons why it resonates around the world and people think of English football the way that they do, and the Premier League was spawned out of this sort of concept of the pyramid, and Wembley. Brazilian players want to play at Wembley. It represents English football. It may not have the lustre of the Twin Towers that once was there before, but it's still the home of English football, of international football, of major international events. And it's not for one individual football club. It's for everything.
Sure.
And so Manchester United suggesting that they can get their nose in the trough and suggest that they should be getting some taxpayers' money is bordering upon moderately insulting. And should be treated with a disdain. And I do hope that the journalists that were pulled together in this little select group of nodding dogs were able to ask that question and say, isn't that relatively preposterous, Sir Jim? You've just spent 1.3 billion quid on buying a 25% shareholding in, arguably, under the title of the book, The World's Greatest Cash Machine, a.k.a. Chris Blackhurst's book. Why aren't you paying for it your bloody selves?
That's a good point. What do you think they'll end up doing? Do you think they'll end up doing what Daniel did at Tottenham? Knock down White Hart Lane and build right beside it, but a state-of-the-art stadium. Of course, the forerunner to all of this,
I neither know nor care.
I insist on this, was Fergus McCann at Celtic. The Scottish-Canadian businessman who came in, looked at Celtic Park, said, we're not moving. We're going to turn this into a state-of-the-art, superb stadium where it is, and that's what they've done.
Well, it depends what the chassis is. If you can build on the chassis and make it better in terms of the infrastructure that's there. I know that they're going to bring Gary Neville into the consultancy purpose. Maybe they're going to look at his glossy little hotel on the footprint of Old Trafford and get that removed and knocked down and maybe build upon something there. That's why they've got him involved.
Incidentally, your behaviour inside that hotel that night with me was disgraceful. You're complaining about that, complaining about this, complaining about the next. Is Gary the right man to help, though? That's not exactly a silly move.
In what depends on what capacity.
It's a prudent move.
Well, it depends in what capacity you're talking about.
He's the voice of many fans.
Yeah, he's the mayor of Manchester, the de facto mayor of Manchester, or believes he is. But look, there's lots of things that Gary Neville says that are very coherent. And given the fact that he's been very, very critical of the Glazers regime, what do you do with your enemies? You bring them closer.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, because Gary didn't say two things when he was being paid by the Glazers, didn't talk about this awful regime that he played in when he was there. He's only doing that because he knows that the gallery is very much against the Glazers, and rightly so to some extent, because if you've bought a football club that's cost you nothing and you've made millions out of it, or almost billions now, not almost billions, billions out of it, and it's not cost you a copper coin, and your team isn't performing on the pitch, then you're going to be copping this criticism. And if you won't talk to the fans and engage in them, give them anything to cling on to, you're going to get criticism. And if you leave a vacuum, you're going to get people like Neville that come in and fill it. Right now, whether he adds value or whether they want to talk to him about knocking down that grotty hotel of his in the footprint of Old Trafford.
Not grotty. That's unfair. You get the best room that night.
Well, that wasn't very difficult. You put your key in the door, it breaks the window at the back of the room. It's that bloody small. Look, the point is that Neville's a voice. He understands Manchester United. Some of the things he says are good, and some of the things he says are rubbish. And some people could say that about some of the things that we say. I say. No, I say then. Yeah, fine, fair enough. Yeah, that's just my mother though. But the point is that I don't know whether Gary adds any value to the equation, or it looks like a very clever move to bring a dissenting voice into the fold.
Right.
I would imagine that Gary Neville's contribution to the intellectual capital around the redevelopment of Old Trafford will be as much as his contribution towards the success of Salford, i.e. Peter Lim's money.
Where it is prudent is to have a football board that consists of people like David Gill and Sir Alex. I mean, yes, surely.
Yes, I would. Look, with due respect to Alex Ferguson, he's 81 years of age.
Yeah.
And that time has passed. And whilst you can pick up invaluable thought process from him on the football operation. I'm not going to really consult him too much about the commercial side of things.
Okay.
You know, part of the reasons why the Glazers own this football club is because of Alex Ferguson's dispute over that bloody horse. So with that in mind, the Rock of Gibraltar, with that in mind, careful what you wish for. David Gill, different animal. Completely different animal, commercial mind that will communicate well with Jim Radcliffe. Whether he's coming back into the fold, who knows?
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.